That's great, and thank you, Bron, and thank you everyone for joining me today. As Bron mentioned, in this session, we're going to have a look at some of the risks associated with buying a residential property. I'll give you an idea of how we produce our reports and also what to do if any of the risks are flagged. I'll also take you through our available residential reports to give you an idea of which ones are suited to different transactions. So just to give you an idea of how we started here at Groundsure, we scanned and digitized around 1.6 million historical maps, and we did this about 17 years ago now. So when we did this, you can see the paper copies on the left-hand side, and then you can see the digitization process and how it looks on our system on the right-hand side, and that's the same area as is on the maps there. So we identified all of the land uses that might be an issue in terms of contaminated land, and they were all labelled by hand just to enable us to do that next process of digitizing the data. We scanned all of our maps in at the highest possible resolution at 500 dots per inch, and then the next process of this was to go over these historical maps, polygonize each feature that might be an issue, and label all of them relevantly to what the risks are associated with it. This makes up our historical land use database, and it underpins our business here at Groundsure. And you might think that when you order one of our reports, you get it back within 30 minutes to an hour. That's because we've already done all of this work behind the scenes. So we know exactly what's there, we know exactly what the risk is, we know exactly when it's from and what the site was used for. So we can get that report, if there's no risk associated with it, we can get that report back to you pretty quickly. So in terms of how our consultants write the reports, you guys will place an order for a report, and it'll go through our risk algorithm, which looks at that historical land use database. If land uses of concern are identified in proximity, the report is then referred to our consultants, who will then view the land uses of concern via our report writing portal, which is called the Consultatron. The consultants will then interrogate the different maps and the different data that we have. And also just something to be aware of is that different land uses have different risk factors. So if we've identified something, then the report then goes back to our consultants, and the red bits that you can see are the highlights of concern that they need to look into in a bit more detail. So as I said, the consultants will have a look at the data. As you can see, as an example from the top image, this site was previously used as a cotton mill and an industrial estate, both of which are potentially contaminative land uses. The consultants will then check to see if we have any additional information stored on our geographical information systems. So you can see the purple triangles in the bottom map. These are reports that we've written on properties in the area previously, so we can actually go back to them, consult on what guidance we've given and the opinion we've given, so we can make sure that we're in line with what we're giving you for the new site. You can also see the blue circles that are on the map as well. These are reference to any additional information we've been given that we then store and continually update our database with. So say, for example, if you need to get further information and you get an NHBC policy, for example, on a plot you're dealing with on a new build development, we will attach that NHBC policy to the whole development. So if you're dealing with a plot on the same development in the future, then we will already have that information there. So hopefully we can pass that report first time for you and save you getting the information again. So as I said, we're continually updating our database to hopefully make sure that less reports are coming back in need of further assessment. We can keep everything moving along quite nicely. And just to keep you aware that contaminated sites are still popping up, and this was an investigation as Part 2A of the Contaminated Land Environmental Protection Act, and it was the first one that came about in quite a few years. This was a housing estate that was built in the early 1950s, and it was home to the Hills Chemical Works, which manufactured fertilizers there from 1889, and copper was also smelted on site from 1786 onwards. This estate includes 112 residential properties, both private dwellings and homes owned and leased by tenants to Anglesey County Council. The investigations arose as the council were undertaking their Part 2A duties by identifying and investigating potentially contaminated land. When the estate was first built, there was little knowledge or understanding of land contamination, although it is thought that the developers would have had to import topsoil onto the site to form the gardens and grassed areas. The council contracted a consultant to take soil samples of residents' gardens over a period of a few months, and they got the results back in November of 2018. And it was revealed then that in 95 of the properties, no significant risks were found. However, in the remaining 16 properties, high concentrations of potentially lethal arsenic and lead were discovered. As a result, remediation is required, and the Welsh Government are contributing up to 60% of the clean-up costs under the Welsh Government's Contaminated Land Capital Programme, and the Anglesey County Council are paying the rest. And then something else to be aware of, just for your client's sake, is that in 2013, DEFRA announced that they would be axing the Contaminated Land Capital Grant. This is the fund that was used for identifying, investigating and remediating contaminated sites. In terms of what it means for property purchasers, it could lead to human health problems. It could be a blight on properties, meaning they may not be sellable. And it could also reduce the amenity of the property. So for certain land users, certain activities are not allowed, such as if you live on a landfill, then the use of barbecues is restricted, just due to the risk of explosion from the landfill gas. Or if your house is built on contaminated ground, you may not wish to grow vegetables. It's also something to be aware of in terms of maintainable infrastructure, such as fence partitioning off of the contaminated area. You may be responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of this. And as the demand for housing outweighs supply, and there being less land to build on, more and more brownfield sites are subsequently being redeveloped by the private development sector. Of course, planning applications received by local authorities where the land currently presents risk of contamination are likely to include conditions to remediate this. The councils will then review the site once the build is complete, just to ensure that the land is not capable of being determined as contaminated land under Part 2A. This will be the preferred choice for local authorities, as the costs in particular will be absorbed by the private sector, and there would be no concerns over how to fund the remediation of such sites. Now, within our residential searches, we offer 3 core recommendations. If the information provided is sufficient, we should be able to revise the report to a pass. And it is recommended that you cross-reference the other documents associated with the transaction to work out the easiest way of revising the report. We would suggest that if the property is a new build or built within the last 10 years, then it will more than likely have that NHBC certificate with the contaminated land cover. If the property is slightly older, it may have been remediated under planning, mainly for properties after 1985, but more commonly in the last 20 years. These 2 options are pretty quick and easy to get a hold of, and it costs relatively little, if anything at all. If you're going down the planning route, it is important that the planning conditions contain one relating to contaminated land, and that the condition has also been discharged or satisfied. In order to revise our reports, we would require both of these documents. The next option would be to pursue the local authority. And when doing this, it's really important to know what to ask the council and to also phrase the questions correctly. We can give you this guidance, but in terms of what we'd need to know, we need to find out if the council are aware of the former land use of the site as identified in the Groundsure report, their intentions with regards to Part 2A. Do they intend to investigate? What is the priority level of the site? Is it high, medium or low? How many sites do they have on the inspection list? And how long do they think it will take to investigate all prior sites? Not all searches can be revised to a pass, and in that instance, environmental insurance is one route that you can go down, and that's something that we offer here at Groundsure. We can offer bespoke quotes on insurance for certain properties if that's what you want to have a look at. So flooding is also a major aspect of our reports, and also a major aspect of the outlook of the climate and environmental issues that we see today, as the last couple of days has proven. Now, the most recent figures published by the Environment Agency indicate that the number of properties at risk of flooding has risen by 700,000 properties over the last few years, from 5.2 to 5.9 million. Additionally, there's around 5 million people that live and work in a flood risk area. 55% of water treatment plants and 14% of electricity infrastructure is also at risk. And this can have a wider effect, as it's not just properties that are hit by the floodwater itself, but also properties that are further afield that get their water treated at these plants, and their electricity from the infrastructure will also be affected in that way too. The effects of flooding and managing flood risk is costing us around the UK around £2.5 billion each year at the moment. And this slide shows the average cost of insurance claims for the three biggest perils affecting a property. The average cost of flood damage is approximately £28,000, which is almost 4 times higher than the cost of a fire. However, if we look back at those massive floods that we saw up in the north in 2015-16 around Christmas times, these were atypical, with the average cost of each domestic claim reaching around £50,000. This reflects the extensive damage caused to properties, not only by the inundation of water, but also the damage caused to the structure of the property, as well as contamination of the floodwaters. 80% of claimants installed fire protection, 54% of claimants installed measures for burglary, and only 6% of claimants took steps for flood protection. From a residential perspective, a flooded home is costly not only in terms of money and time, but also in terms of the emotional upheaval, ill health, and the inconvenience. A flood can cause structural damage to a property, contamination, and even reduce the property value. Previously, those living in a high flood risk area were subject to extortionate insurance premiums, and in some cases, insurance not being available at all. There has been a new campaign that's been launched by the Environment Agency after research suggested less than half of under 35s would know what to do if a flood warning was issued. Young people are the group least aware of the dangers of flooding in their area, as well as what to do if flood warnings are issued, and the Environment Agency and the British Red Cross are urging younger people to learn how to look after themselves and their communities in times of flooding. So within our reports, we will provide an overall flood risk rating, which is based on a 5-tiered scale. So low, low to moderate, moderate, moderate to high, and high. We also provide a negligible risk if there is very minimal flood risk in the area. The overall flood rating is calculated combined risk, taking into account flooding from rivers, the sea, surface water, groundwater, historic flood events, and the presence of flood defences. Each flood risk type has a different weighting. And another problem that we're seeing is that each year around 10,000 homes are built on the floodplain. This equates to around 1 in 14 homes. In the 5 years since 2013-14, over 1,200 residential units have been given the green light, even after the Environment Agency advice was overruled. The Environment Agency figures show that it has raised objections on flood risk grounds in more than 14,000 planning applications since 2012-2013. Of those where the decision is known, the agency's objections have been overruled or partially overruled on 330 occasions. One single application included 1,000 residential units, while another had more than 500 units on there. Many of the properties were in flood zone 3, which is the highest level of flood risk, including several where there was a concern over risk to life or property, or the development was next to a watercourse or flood defences. Where building in these areas is being considered, councils must ensure that suitable alternative sites at lower flood risk are not available, that new developments will be resistant to flooding and safe for its lifetime, and flood risk will not be increased elsewhere. At the end of the day, the Environment Agency is only a consultee who provide advice. The final decision rests with the local planning authorities. And this is a case back in 2012 where major flooding swept through this new Taylor Wimpey development. Around 100 homes on the development on the Glasdeer estate in Ruthin in North Wales were left under 3 feet of water, when floods struck following heavy downpours. In the wake of the deluge, some residents expressed concerns their homes, built on a Denbighshire floodplain, would lose value because of the vulnerability exposed by the flood. Taylor Wimpey has never restarted work on Glasdeer, where homes were marketed for between £140,000 and £250,000. It has previously said that it had to secure the confidence from existing and future customers to complete the build, which obviously never happened, so they never did. It doesn't help that the development lies within the floodplain and is at risk of surface water flooding, something which is becoming more common with new developments as we build over previously permeable surfaces. The newly built estate did have a flood defence system in place, estimated to protect against a 1 in 1,000 year incident, yet 122 houses were badly flooded. An independent report into the disaster was undertaken and found that the culvert screens were blocked, were of poor design and didn't comply with any recognised standards. These particular culverts that were on the site were the responsibility of the local authority. And current guidance said that such grills as these culverts were not even necessary, but for safety reasons on such large culverts and should be left off so that debris such as vegetation, shopping trolleys and all sorts of rubbish that is left in ditches and brought down when it's wet can actually flow through. The Glasdeer flood defences would have been very effective but for the blockage, and the area had previously estimated to be protected against all but a 1 in 1,000 year event, but that estimate had not focused on the effect of these blocked culvert grills. And this is another case just highlighting the importance of filling out forms correctly and to do with a TA6 form, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. Back in 2014, a family bought this property for £750,000. The sellers had filled out the TA6 form and said that they weren't aware of any flooding that had happened on sites previously. But after the new owners moved in, the very next winter, their garden had completely flooded to look like a lake, as it does on the image on the left-hand side. So what the new buyers did is they looked back through the seller's Facebook page and realised that they'd posted pretty much the same photo a couple of years previously. They'd spoken to their neighbours about it. They'd obviously been aware of what had happened and posted this picture on social media. And now it is going through the rescission on sale contract. They're being sued for compensation for the distress that the purchasers bought. And it just goes to show that if you're dealing with any sellers of property, make sure they're filling out the forms correctly. And if you're dealing with the buyers of property, make sure that you're getting as much flood information up front as you can, just to protect them against anything like this happening in the future. And also, climate change is a very real thing and something that's affecting the amount of flood risk that we have in the UK at the minute. Now, the Met Office records show that since 1910, there have been 17 record-breaking rainfall months or seasons, with 9 of them coming since the year 2000. As intense storms are becoming more frequent, sea levels are also rising because of climate change. And Sir James Bevan, the Chief Executive of the Environment Agency, said, "Climate change is likely to mean more frequent and intense flooding. Flooding destroys lives, livelihoods and property. Our flood defences reduce the risk of flooding, and our flood warnings help keep communities safe when it threatens, but we can never entirely eliminate the risk of flooding. Checking your flood risk is the first step to protecting yourself, your loved ones and your home." If we look back at the summer of 2012, we had lengthy periods of drought, and it came to an abrupt end when we had intense rainfall, and it increased the risk of flooding from rivers and surface water for long periods. Almost 8,000 homes and businesses were flooded across the country, particularly in the southwest. In the winter of 2013-14, we had a massive coastal surge and record sea levels on the north and northeast coasts. This was followed by 12 storms in succession and became the wettest winter for 250 years. 11,000 homes were flooded. And then those flood incidents from 2015 and 16, that caused flooding to 17,000 properties across the north of England. And it was 2015, December was the wettest month ever recorded. The threat of flooding is real and increasing, as is also demonstrated by its listing as one of the nation's major threats. And last year, the Met Office published new innovative research which found that for England and Wales, there is a 1 in 3 chance of a new monthly rainfall record in at least one region each winter. So on our reports here at Groundsure, we use land registry polygon data, which means in terms of flood risk, we no longer have a point and radius search. We do the flood risk assessment based on the boundary of the property, which should mean that less reports are showing a flood risk that isn't relevant to the site. It means that you have to buy less reports on top of what you're already ordering, and hopefully it keeps everything moving along quite nicely and puts your buyers' minds at ease that nothing's going to affect their property boundary itself. And if anything does flag up as a risk in terms of flooding, we will give bespoke recommendations depending on what type of flooding that we have identified. And we'll also give general flood advice. So in terms of consider those flood prevention measures that I mentioned earlier, have a look what sort of insurance is on offer. And also Flood Re is a very good scheme that your clients could be able to take advantage of. Now, Flood Re is a scheme put together by the government and the insurance industry, and it just means, in basic terms, that if your client is buying a property in a high-risk flooding area, they should be able to get that affordable insurance, which means that they'll be able to get their mortgage through. I would recommend having a look further into Flood Re, and all of our reports that have the flood information in will let you know if your client's property is seeded into this Flood Re scheme, not the area, not the postcode, but that property itself, so you can look into it a bit further. So ground stability is also one of the big things that we look at in our reports, and also has a knock-on effect by the amount that we see of flooding as well. The more floodings we have, the more ground stability issues that will come as a knock-on effect of that. Now, subsidence is a lowering or collapse of the ground. It can be triggered by man-made disturbance, a change in drainage patterns, heavy rain, or by water abstraction. Subsidence has the potential to cause engineering problems such as damage to foundations, buildings, and infrastructure. And it can have many causes, from man-made issues such as mining to those based on the underlying geology of an area. Natural ground subsidence refers to the upward, lateral, or downward movement of the ground that can be caused by a range of natural geological hazards. Such movements are typically in the order of centimetres, but in exceptional circumstances can be much larger. The Association of British Insurers estimates that subsidence or ground movement is the cause of between 30 and 40,000 insurance claims per year, with an average cost to the insurance industry of around £300 million. However, this can rise to around £1 billion in an extreme year, where it's either been particularly dry or particularly wet. Significant natural ground instability has the potential to cause subsidence damage to some weaker buildings and structures, and individual claims can run to tens of thousands of pounds if a property has to be underpinned or rebuilt. When we saw last year that massive period of dry, warm weather that we had, insurance claims for subsidence damage hit levels not seen since 2006, where we had the heatwave conditions as well. ABI said compensation for things like cracked doors, walls and windows almost quadrupled in July, August and September of 2018 compared to the same period of 2017. It reported claims worth more than £64 million submitted by more than 10,000 households during the third quarter of 2018, which again is the most since that heatwave of 2006. One of the biggest issues we have with natural ground subsidence is clay soils. And the image on the left shows subsidence hazard in a normal year versus subsidence hazard in an extremely hot and dry year, such as we had last year. Now, whilst there are 6 main types of natural ground subsidence, clay soils is thought to be the biggest problem and the cause of most insurance claims. It equates to around 75% of all claims that we have. Now, shrink swell occurs as a result of changes in the moisture content of clay-rich soils. This is reflected in a change in volume of the ground through shrinking or swelling. This shrink-swell behaviour is the most damaging geohazard in Britain today, costing the economy an estimated £3 billion over the last 10 years. Subsidence claims are usually closely linked with the clay belt that sits around the southeast of England, but clay is found elsewhere in the UK too, and last year's extended dry spell affected large areas of the southwest, the Midlands, the northwest and the northeast, which are producing notable spikes in subsidence claims for the first time in a generation. So clay itself is not the problem. If the clay beneath a house shrinks, the whole property might settle, but usually does so evenly across its footprint, unless other factors are present. These can often include vegetation on one side or corner of a house, modern extensions built to inadequate standards, or water leaking into foundations from collapsed drains, though in dry weather conditions this is less likely. Trees are biological water pumps, and their extensive roots remain the #1 cause of subsidence. Poplars, willows and oaks are among the worst culprits, as they have long root structures that can stretch for over 30 metres and may soak up more than 50,000 litres out of the ground each year. This accelerates the shrinkage of clay subsoil, and depending on the position in relation to a property, can make the rate of shrinkage uneven. This causes properties to distort in different directions, leading to gradually expanding cracks in walls. People often look for large, easily exposed roots to determine whether a tree is causing subsidence, but it is the thin, fibrous roots at the extreme of a root system that have the biggest demand for water. And now displayed on your screen are some of the man-made sources of subsidence. We have some 5,000 years of historic mining in the UK, so coal mining is another large source of subsidence claims, but these are generally dealt with outside of the insurance industry by the Coal Authority, and the Coal Authority have apparently dealt with over 500,000 claims in the last 30 years. To give a little background, mining generally started out as shallow scrapes, and in the case of coal mining, early coal mining tended to occur in the form of bell pits, which, as the name suggests, were bell-shaped and tended to be shallow and known to collapse. As time went on, mining increasingly turned deep underground and probably peaked around the 18th, 19th century, but this has left us with a legacy of old mines, many of which we simply don't know exactly where they are. The Coal Authority, for instance, has a huge warehouse of old paper mining maps, which they inspect and try to make sense of. The early maps are in some cases very inaccurate, and indeed Groundsure only uses maps dating back as far as 1842, as this is really when mapping started to become sufficiently credible, with the birth of Ordnance Survey actually regulating the maps and everything where it is. Unfortunately, the Coal Authority don't know where all the old mines and mining features are. They still discover and work very hard to locate the various shafts and eddics. So this is a case from back in November in 2018, and the residents on this site were actually evacuated from their flats after a sinkhole measuring around 20 feet opened up across next to an exterior wall. Emergency services were called to the scene after this hole was spotted by a member of the public, and it would appear that the flats have been constructed on the site of and very close to the old brickworks that you can see on the map on the left-hand side. The red marker actually shows the approximate location of Cedarwood Drive, as this was at one point used as a brickworks, as mentioned, and this is a map going back to 1937. So the UK has a vast mining legacy, which ultimately has been caused by our need for minerals. The examples shown on your screen come from different locations around the UK, Cumbria and Derbyshire. And these are just a very small selection of the sinkholes that have caused havoc over the last few years. There is currently no guidance for solicitors to investigate or mention the possibility of ground stability issues to their client, which is why we have provided some of the information within our flagship reports. We always suggest to check the conveyancing handbook to see exactly where you stand on ground stability issues, but ordering one of our reports with the ground stability information in If anything is highlighted as a risk, getting a surveyor involved, that pretty much covers your due diligence. And another thing to be aware of is the building of HS2 or not. It depends. We'll see by the end of this year. But some government advisors have warned that many locations along the HS2 rail line have unstable soil, putting high-speed trains at risk of derailment. There was a study of the HS2 route by British Geological Survey scientists, and they named 3 specific sections in Perivale, West London, Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire, and Hampton in Arden, just south of Birmingham, as being at particular risk. So they basically found that these sections have very soft, fine soils, which are vulnerable to track and ground displacement under the pressure of trains travelling at the speeds planned for HS2. So it is something that they need to have a look at. They either need to spend billions of extra pounds shoring up the ground around these bits of track, or they have to run the trains a lot slower over these stretches, which basically defeats the purpose of having a high-speed train. And it's not just phase 1 that's affected, but phase 2 is affected as well. This area of track going up from Birmingham to Manchester passes directly over a second area of highly unstable ground, which is the salt mining district near the towns of Middlewich, Northwich and Winsford. To avoid the danger, again, just of this commercial mining, salt mining, that's still going on today, HS2 may have to be slowed over several stretches, which will cut or eliminate the advantage over conventional rail. Alternatively, there may again need to be massive works to stiffen the ground the line runs over, potentially adding billions of pounds to its cost. HS2 needs to run at 225 miles an hour if it is to meet its ambitious business case and capacity claims. The claims are that it will be able to run up to 18 trains an hour, one every 3 minutes 20 seconds, along the core route, more than any other high-speed line in the world. If the trains had to be slower, frequencies would have to be reduced, putting at risk the promised service to many destinations. And again, the same with flood risk. If a particular type of ground stability issue is popping up on the report, we will bespoke the recommendations tailored to it. We will also highlight if a Con 29M report is needed. If you need to get in touch, if it's a new build, the NHBC policy might have dealt with any structural issues. But we'll also give general advice such as considering having a structural survey conducted by a structural surveyor, just to determine whether or not the property is affected. No, just to know that the structural survey will supersede the Groundsure report. We tell your clients to do a visual check of the property and look for any big cracks down any walls. And you can also contact the relevant local authority just to ask for records of the property and local area relating to subsidence. Just to give you a quick update on transportation and what's happening around the UK at the minute. And in terms of HS2, to give you a bit of background, the costs of HS2 seem to be continually increasing. When the idea was first raised, government said it would cost around £32 billion, when in fact that number is nearer to £56 billion at the moment. And then in even more recent reviews, it is likely that that number will increase further as phase 1, which is London to Birmingham, is likely to cost over £48 billion itself. It's fair to say that numbers don't really speak for themselves, and I don't think even HS2 seem to know the true costs of the scheme at the minute. They have already spent around £4.1 billion. This is before any construction started, and it includes £1.7 billion on acquiring land and property. At the end of July last year, 492 properties had been acquired by schemes such as statutory blight, discretionary schemes and private agreements. Another 165 properties were purchased via compulsory purchase, covering 739 properties' interests. It is estimated that for phase 1 alone, HS2 Limited will need to acquire approximately 70 square kilometres, more than 17,000 acres of land along the route of the railway. And the government are launching a review of high speed of HS2 with a go or no-go decision by the end of this year. This is what the Transport Secretary, Groundsure, has said. It will consider whether and how the project should proceed. Billions have already been spent, but Mr. Shapps refused to rule out scrapping it entirely. He said it was responsible to see whether the benefits really stack up. And during the Conservative leadership campaign, Boris Johnson said that he would not scrap plans for the new rail link, but did express anxieties about the business case. In July this year, the current chairman of the project reportedly warned that the total cost could rise by 30 billion, up from that current budget of 56 billion. On the 3rd of September, it was also announced that the first phase of HS2 is to be delayed by up to 5 years. That section of the line was due to open at the end of 2026, but it could now be between 2028 and 2031 before the first trains run on the route. The second phase has also been delayed. That route from Birmingham to Manchester and Leeds was due to open in 2032-33, but has been pushed back to 2035-40. The government has said that construction work will continue while the review is ongoing. And in terms of other rail infrastructure that we'll look at in our reports, if you're dealing with any properties in London, we'll include information on Crossrail 1 and 2. We'll also look at the London Underground and DLR, but we'll also look at Merseyrail, Glasgow Subway. We look at the Croydon Tram Link and also the Tyne and Wear Metro. Our reports, where appropriate, will also cover active railways and stations, and we'll also look at historic and abandoned railways. Energy is also something we look at in our reports as either a screening or the full information. And one of the things that we look at is fracking as well, and any fracking sites and any fracking licenses that are up for grabs or have already been given out. And this is the only active fracking site in the UK at the minute, and you might have seen it on the news quite recently, because this is Preston New Road in Little Plumpton in Preston. And this started being developed in around 2015, where they wanted to test for shale gas under the site up in Preston. It was put back by the local authorities, but then appeals were lodged with the Secretary of State, who said that they could go ahead with it with certain conditions. October last year was the first time that fracking in the UK had actually taken place. However, it was quickly halted following multiple tremors, some reporting around 50 in the Blackpool area at the time. Quadrilla, who are the operators of the Preston New Road site, said 2018 was a very positive year as it began to see natural gas grow to the surface. The gas returned to the surface along with water being recycled from the shale rock after hydraulic fracturing a small section of the shale surrounding the first horizontal exploration well. Quadrilla described the news as significant and indicative of the potential of the shale. And I mentioned you might have seen it in the news recently. This site in Lancashire has been plagued with tremors, the most recent occurring over the bank holiday weekend, which was just at the end of August 2019. And as you can see, it's something that the government put in place where they said that any tremors that were up to 0.4, over 0.5 on the Richter scale, then production needs to stop, they need to investigate, and they need to make sure everything's safe before they can start again. I just don't think they envisaged this amount of earth tremors actually happening at this one site. And also, in terms of wind installations, it won't surprise you to know that the UK has a lot of wind. We are the 6th largest producer of wind power in the world, and just around 14% of our electricity is generated through wind energy. The UK is the windiest country in Europe and could power ourselves several times over using wind alone. Throughout history, communities have harnessed the power of the wind, driven by the need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and secure homegrown energy supplies. Wind energy is the world's fastest growing renewable energy type. And as of January this year, we had just short of 2,000 onshore operational projects with over 7,600 turbines. There were 37 offshore operational projects with just short of 2,000 turbines. And we also provide data on planning applications relating to wind installations dating back to 2009. So we won't only show you ones that are already there, we'll also let you know of any planning applications that are in for wind installations at the minute as well. So in terms of our reports, from a residential perspective, our flagship report and our main report is the Groundsure Home Buyers. In terms of your due diligence and what you need to look at from a law society point of view, this report will cover you completely. It covers fully contaminated land, full flood information. There is absolutely no need to buy a separate flood report. There's nothing in our standalone flood report that isn't in this in the home buyers report. You will do a radon check and also have our full ground stability information. So again, there's no need to buy a separate ground stability report. It will screen for energy, planning and transportation as well. And just to highlight to your clients, if anything is in the area, they may want to have a look at further. It's a report that we changed slightly at the start of the year, where we slimmed it down to only include the relevant information within a report. We used to fill our home buyers report with needless maps and data and further investigations that don't need to happen because a risk wasn't identified. So now, as you can see by the example on your screen, if a risk isn't there, so radon has passed, for example, you'll notice there isn't a page number next to it. We've checked the data. Everything is okay with the site. There's no need to fill the report full of irrelevant information for your client. It should make the report easier to read through. It should mean that everything gets moving a bit quicker. And as I said, it only includes relevant information to the site. So it means your client is able to flick through the report and read it and hopefully not come back and ask as many questions as they used to. We also offer a standalone planning report. And I always say that a planning report is the first report I would buy if I am buying a property. I want to know if there's any major developments going on near me, if there's any large projects, if there's a Tesco's going up around the corner, if they're building a large housing development near me, I'd want to know about it. Also, if I'm looking to extend my property in the near future, how likely am I to get my planning application through based on the other applications that have been approved in the area? And this report will give you both sets of information for the last 10 years. It's got air quality information in there, and it also lets you know all of the local information, such as local school leagues, crime stats, where the nearest cash machine is, where the nearest pubs and bars and leisure centres, police stations. Anything you could want to know about a local area is within this report. And we also have a standalone energy and transportation report. So the things I've just mentioned, such as fracking sites, conventional oil and gas, wind installations, either existing or planned, also solar installations as well. Any major energy infrastructure is included in this, such as major gas pipelines or electricity lines. And we'll also look at HS2, Crossrail 1 and 2, the underground railways and the railways that I mentioned previously as well. And if you want to get the all-in-one residential report, then we offer the Groundsure Vista report. So we put this report together based on people saying how frustrating it was that if you bought a home buyer's report, for example, it highlighted that HS2 might have been a risk. You'd have to go back to your client, let them know that HS2 is a risk, ask if they want another report ordering, go back onto the system, order the report and charge them an extra disbursement. This makes all of the risk alerts obsolete because everything is included in the one report. It means that you can quote one disbursement cost up front and you've got everything packaged together in one report for your client. And it completely covers you for your due diligence, and there's no need to go back and ask for extra costs. So as I said, it's the all-in-one residential report, and it's one that's gone down very well. And people seem to like it, especially if you're dealing with a property in an area you're not sure about, then covering everything to make sure that your client is covered is very favourable with a lot of firms at the moment. And we also offer our Con29M report as well. And this report has been signed off by the Law Society, and it is an official Con29M approved by the Law Society and our partners at the Coal Law Authority. This report answers all the 11 questions for residential queries, and we take great consideration when choosing partners to work with, as does Mining Searchers UK. And this Con29M that we have produced with Mining Searchers UK has been carefully built by both companies and is backed by both companies' expertise in our respective fields. Mining Searchers UK's reputation is unrivaled in the industry. The report is competitively priced, so please do speak to your InfoTrack account manager should you want more information on that. And just to let you know that Mining Searchers UK have over 40 years experience in coal and non-coal investigations. They have a trusted name in the industry. Large commercial firms refer all of their mining and non-mining cases to MS UK, regardless of who the report provider is. And these reports, as with other residential reports, provide clear information and recommendations, and they have all the relevant questions on the front page, with the recommendations and the next steps immediately inside on page 2, followed by a hazard map and the full questions in detail. It comes with a £100,000 insurance policy from Zurich, which is double the amount of current industry standards. And these reports are universally accepted by lenders, and there has yet to be a report that's come back where a lender has had any concerns. We are also a full consultancy service, so if you do need anything, then our team are here to help. One thing I always like to say is that on the bottom of every single one of our reports is our direct telephone number. If your client ever has a question about one of our reports, they can actually call us directly and a consultant will go through their report with them. Saves you getting involved in environmental matters that you don't want to, and hopefully take those questions off your hands. If you need client care letters, any in-house training, any product cards or samples, that's something we can provide for you as well. And that's everything from me. Thank you very much for your time today. I'll pass you back over to Bron at Info.